Lisa and Mark Harper seemed like the perfect couple until the home cameras they installed for safety revealed a nightmare no one could have imagined. In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood, the Harpers appeared to have everything a family could want. Their two-story home sat on a peaceful street lined with tall maple trees that turned a rich golden red every autumn. From the outside, their life looked almost idyllic. Lisa Harper was the kind of mother who waved to neighbors and offered homemade cookies to delivery drivers. Her husband Mark was known as a hard worker, quiet, dependable, the kind of man who shoveled his elderly neighbor's driveway without being asked. Their 6-year-old son Dylan was a cheerful boy, always running through the yard with his toy cars or chasing the family's golden retriever, Max. To anyone passing by, the Harpers were a perfect family in a perfect neighborhood. But inside the Harper home, perfection was only an illusion. After losing her job at the local design firm, Lisa began to change in ways no one could explain. She used to spend her mornings sketching in her sunlit kitchen, humming softly while Dylan played nearby. Now she barely left the house. The light seemed to have gone out of her eyes, replaced by a distant, distracted look that made Mark worry. At first, he tried to comfort her, suggesting new hobbies or part-time work, but she brushed him off, saying she just needed time to get herself together. That time stretched into weeks, then months. It wasn't only her mood that shifted, her habits became strange. She started spending long hours in the basement, claiming she was organizing old boxes. But when Mark went down there one evening, he found nothing moved, no boxes opened, and a faint smell of burnt wax in the air. When he asked about it, she smiled in that tight, unnatural way she had adopted lately and said she was just burning old candles for stress relief. Still, the answer didn't sit right with him. Dylan noticed things too. He began waking from nightmares, saying he heard footsteps under his floor at night. Mark tried to reassure him that it was just the old house settling, though deep down he wondered if there was more to it. Sometimes he'd find Lisa standing at Dylan's bedroom door late at night, completely still, staring into the dark room. When he asked what she was doing, she declaimed she was checking on him, but there was something unsettling about the way she didn't T-blink, didn't move, until he called her name twice. Around this time, several houses in their area had been broken into. It gave Mark a reason to act on his growing unease. He suggested installing home security cameras for safety. Lisa agreed almost immediately, smiling a little too quickly, her tone too bright. Mark assumed she was just trying to appear supportive, but part of him felt a strange flicker of relief. Maybe the cameras would give him peace of mind, prove that nothing was wrong. Within a week, small black cameras were tucked into corners of the living room, hallway, Dylan's room, and even the basement. Mark felt a quiet sense of control return, believing the worst that could happen was catching a raccoon sneaking in. But when he watched Lisa through the camera feed for the first time standing alone in the basement, looking up toward the lens as if she knew it was there, a chill ran through him. He quickly shut off the screen, dismissing the moment as nothing. He told himself she was just curious about the new setup. Yet somewhere deep inside, he felt an uneasiness settle that would never leave him. Nobody could have imagined that the very cameras meant to protect the Harpers would become the silent witnesses to something far darker than a break in, something that would soon shatter their perfect image forever. The first strange event took place on a damp Tuesday night when the wind howled softly against the windows and rain drizzled down the roof in uneven rhythms. Mark had taken an overnight shift at a nearby construction site, leaving Lisa and Dylan alone in the house. He called home around 9 to say goodnight, and everything seemed fine. Lisa's voice sounded normal, calm, even cheerful, and Dylan had already been tucked into bed. By midnight, the neighborhood had fallen silent, save for the occasional bark of a distant dog. It was one of those nights when everything felt too still. At exactly 2:30 a.m., a dull thud echoed through the Harper home. It was subtle, just enough to wake Dylan, who sat up in bed and listened. The sound came again, like something heavy shifting across the floor below. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, too scared to move. The next morning, he told his father that someone had walked into his room during the night. He remembered hearing slow, careful footsteps and the sound of breathing that wasn't his own. Mark glanced at Lisa when Dylan mentioned it, but she laughed it off, saying he must have been dreaming after watching one of his spooky cartoons. Still, the story lingered in Mark's mind all day. When he returned home later that week, he decided to check the footage from the security cameras, more out of curiosity than suspicion. The cameras had been installed in nearly every room, including Dylan's bedroom, where one small device sat high in the corner. As he scrolled through the recordings, everything looked normal until he reached the night of the incident. At 2:16 a.m., the feed from Dylan's room flickered, then cut to black. Every other camera continued recording, showing nothing out of the ordinary. But the feed from that one camera stayed dark for 2 hours. Mark's first thought was a technical glitch. Yet when the footage resumed at 4:19 what appeared on the screen made his breath catch in his throat. The room was dimly lit by the nightlight shaped like a small blue moon. Dylan was asleep in his bed, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. And there, sitting in a wooden chair beside him, was Lisa. She wasn't reading a book or looking at her phone. She was completely still, her hands resting on her knees, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes were wide open, locked on Dylan. She didn't blink. The footage showed her sitting like that for nearly an hour, unmoving, until the first hints of dawn crept through the window. Mark replayed the footage 3 times, hoping it was some kind of trick of the light or a reflection, but it wasn't. Every time, it was the same eerie scene. He felt something inside him twist. The next evening, he mentioned what he saw to Lisa in a careful, casual tone. She didn't seem surprised. She explained she had been watching over Dylan because he wasn't feeling well, insisting she had simply fallen asleep in the chair. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. Though Mark wanted to believe her, he couldn't shake the image from his mind. The stillness, the way her eyes never moved, it didn't look like someone drifting to sleep beside their sick child. It looked like someone studying something, waiting for something. That night, Mark checked every camera twice before bed. For the first time since moving into the house, he locked the bedroom door. Something about Lisa's quick dismissal and the hollow tone in her voice made him realize that whatever was happening in their home was only beginning. A month passed, and the tension inside the Harper household thickened like fog. Mark noticed that Dylan had become quieter, his once bright personality dimming day by day. The boy, who used to laugh at everything and fill the house with noise, now spent hours alone in his room, drawing on scraps of paper he hid under his bed. One morning, the phone rang. It was Dylan's teacher. She said he had missed several days of school and seemed distracted when he did attend. Then she mentioned something that made Mark's chest tighten. Dylan had been drawing disturbing images, dark shapes, locked doors, and figures with hollow faces. She gently asked if everything was all right at home. Mark didn't know how to answer. After hanging up, he searched Dylan's room and found the drawings himself. One showed a tall, shadowy woman standing beside a small boy, both surrounded by circles and strange symbols. Another showed a basement door with a red X drawn across it. Mark felt a wave of unease rise inside him. That door, the one leading down to the basement, had always bothered him lately. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone down there. It had become Lisa's private space, a place she guarded fiercely. That night, after Dylan went to bed, Mark opened the security camera archives and began reviewing the last month's footage. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt certain there was something there. As he scrubbed through the late-night hours, something caught his attention. Over and over, in the early hours of the morning, Lisa appeared on screen, walking quietly through the hallway. In most clips, she was barefoot, her movements unnaturally slow. Sometimes she stopped outside Dylan's room, waiting for long, still moments before leading him, half asleep, down the stairs toward the basement. When Mark opened the basement feed, the screen turned to static. Every night the same thing happened. Just as they reached the bottom step, the picture vanished. All other cameras continued to function perfectly. It was as if Lisa had deliberately cut the feed. Mark's hands shook as he scrolled through the data logs and confirmed his suspicion. The basement camera had been manually disabled multiple times. That same night, while Lisa slept, Mark crept downstairs with a small toolkit. The air in the basement was colder than the rest of the house, heavy with a faint smell of wax and something metallic. He installed a tiny hidden camera behind a vent, making sure it was invisible from any angle. Then he went back upstairs, his heart pounding. The next evening, after pretending to fall asleep, he waited until midnight before opening his laptop. The live feed flickered on. At first, there was only darkness, then the faint glow of candlelight filled the screen. What he saw made him freeze in place. The basement walls were covered in hand-drawn symbols, circles, crosses, and jagged shapes smeared in something that looked like ash. Dozens of candles burned around the room, their flames trembling. Lisa stood at the center, wearing one of his old shirts, her hair hanging loose over her face. Dylan was there too, standing completely still. His small hands were clasped in front of him, eyes half closed as Lisa muttered under her breath. Her voice was low, rhythmic, repeating words that didn't sound like any language Mark had ever heard. At one point, she dipped her fingers into a bowl of dark liquid and traced a line across Dylan's forehead. The boy didn't flinch. Then she placed her hand over his head, whispering faster, her voice growing urgent, almost frantic. Mark's breath came in shallow bursts as he watched, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. It looked like some kind of ritual, but for what? He didn't know if she believed she was protecting him or summoning something worse. When the chanting stopped, Lisa turned suddenly toward the vent, the exact spot where the camera was hidden, as if she knew she was being watched. The screen flickered once, then went black. 2 nights after Mark had seen the chilling footage of Lisa's ritual, he found himself unable to sleep. Every creak in the house made him tense. He lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, replaying those horrifying images in his mind, Lisa's whispering voice. The symbols on the walls, the way she turned toward the hidden camera, as if she could see straight through the lens. Exhaustion finally pulled him into a shallow sleep sometime after midnight. When he woke again, the other side of the bed was cold. For a moment, he thought Lisa was just in the bathroom, but the house was unnervingly quiet. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2:14 a.m. Something inside him twisted. He got up, calling Lisa's name once, then again. No response. When he reached Dylan's room and found the bed empty, his heart began to race. The blankets were pushed aside as if someone had been lifted gently out of them. The nightlight still glowed, casting a faint blue light over the small space. But there was no sign of Dylan. Mark rushed to the living room, then to the kitchen, his breathing shallow, panic rising with every passing second. That was when he remembered the cameras. His hands trembled as he opened the security app on his laptop. One by one, he checked the feeds, nothing unusual in the hallways or the kitchen. But when he opened the basement camera, he froze. The feed was live. The timestamp in the corner read 2:17 a. The dim basement lights flickered. And there, at the center of the frame, was Lisa. She was standing beside the old wooden chest near the far wall, the same one they had inherited from her grandmother and barely ever touched. In her arms was Dylan, his body hung limp, one arm dangling lifelessly toward the floor. Mark stared, unable to breathe. Lisa's face was completely blank, her eyes wide and distant. There was no trace of emotion, no fear, no sadness, just emptiness. Slowly, she knelt down beside the chest and opened the heavy lid. The camera's audio picked up the faint creak of the hinges. Without hesitation, she placed Dylan's still body inside, adjusting him carefully, almost tenderly, before lowering the lid. Mark leapt from his chair, nearly knocking the laptop over. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, barely able to speak through his shaking voice. As the dispatcher tried to calm him, he ran down the stairs toward the basement, but by the time he reached the door, something made him stop. There was no sound coming from below. The basement was completely silent. When the police arrived minutes later, Lisa was sitting on the living room couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked calm, composed, her expression empty. Her hair was slightly damp, and her eyes were fixed on the front window. When the officers questioned her, she said she had been waiting for them, though she couldn't or wouldn't explain why. Mark led the police down to the basement, pointing toward the wooden chest with trembling hands. The lid was open, but the inside was empty. The candles and symbols that had covered the walls 2 nights before were gone. Everything looked clean, ordinary, as if nothing unusual had ever happened there. There were no traces of Dylan anywhere, not a footprint, not a single hair, not even the faint smell of wax that had once lingered. Lisa was taken into custody for questioning while forensic teams searched the house. Mark followed them numbly, replaying the footage in his mind, certain that what he'd seen was real. Yet, when investigators checked the security system, the video from that night had vanished. The basement feed showed only static between 2:10 and 2:30 a.m. Every attempt to recover the file failed. By dawn, Lisa had stopped speaking altogether. She just sat in silence, her hands still folded, her eyes distant. When police asked her where Dylan was, she only tilted her head slightly as though listening to something they couldn't hear. And she whispered a single word, so quietly they almost missed it. Safe, but no one could find him, and the house felt colder than ever. Days bled into weeks, and the Harper home became a place of silence. The police searched every inch of Maplewood woods, rivers, abandoned sheds, but no trace of Dylan was ever found. The case began losing momentum, replaced by new headlines and newer tragedies. Only Mark remained fixed in that house, a man haunted by the images he couldn't erase. Lisa had been taken to a psychiatric facility after multiple breakdowns, her mind fragmented and distant. She spoke little, never admitted to harming Dylan, and insisted he was safe somewhere she couldn't follow. Doctors called her delusional. Mark didn't know what to call her anymore. He refused to move out. The neighbors stopped visiting, afraid to even glance toward the house. At night, the empty rooms seemed to breathe. The faint hum of the security system was the only sound keeping him company. Mark spent hours at his desk, eyes burning from sleeplessness as he rewatched every second of footage from the weeks before Dylan disappeared. He convinced himself he had missed something, a shadow, a reflection, a clue hidden in the static. But night after night, there was nothing new. Just the same horror repeating on the screen, Lisa's blank face, the lifeless body of his son, and that damned wooden chest. On the 22nd day, a soft chime woke him from an uneasy sleep. The motion alert from the basement camera blinked on his laptop screen. His throat went dry. The timestamp read 3:06 a.m., just hours earlier. For the first time since that night, the camera had detected movement. With shaking fingers, he clicked the notification and opened the file. At first, there was only stillness. The faint gray light of the basement filled the screen. Everything appeared exactly as it had since the investigation ended, the floor swept clean, the walls bare. The chest sat in its usual place against the far wall, closed and undisturbed. But as the seconds passed, Mark noticed a sound faintly captured by the microphone, a soft groaning of wood, deep and drawn out, like the slow turning of hinges. The lid of the chest began to move. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as he leaned closer. The lid creaked open inch by inch, releasing a puff of dust into the air. Then something inside shifted. A small figure sat up, the movement jerky and stiff like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. It was Dylan. His hair was matted, his clothes the same he'd worn the night he vanished. But his eyes were wrong. They were darker, glassy, with no hint of the warmth they once held. He looked directly into the camera, as though he had been waiting for this moment. The boy's lips parted, forming a small, eerie smile. For a few seconds he didn't move, just stared. Then, barely audible over the soft hum of the camera, he whispered a single word, "Mom." The sound sent an electric chill down Mark's spine. Before he could react, the footage glitched, the image twisting into static. The feed ended. Mark jumped from his chair, stumbling toward the basement. When he threw open the door, the light switch flickered, but revealed nothing unusual. The chest was closed. The air felt heavy, thick with a faint scent of something sweet and rotten. Trembling, he opened the lid, but it was empty. By dawn, investigators were back. They found Mark sitting on the basement floor, staring at the chest, the laptop open beside him, looping the last second of static. When they checked the security system, the new footage was gone deleted automatically, as if it had never existed. They also discovered that Lisa had vanished from the psychiatric facility sometime during the night, leaving no trace. The Harper home was eventually sealed off and declared unsafe. But even after Mark moved away, neighbors swore the lights in the basement still flickered on some nights around 3 a.m. And sometimes, in the faint glow, a small figure could be seen standing by the old wooden chest, waiting,